First, are there any bill introductions this morning? Representative Estes.
I would like to introduce 24 RS 3660, which sets up the Board of Regents and a literacy task approach for getting the science of reading instruction to teachers, so teachers can teach science of reading through a science of reading.
All right, committee, you've heard the bill introduction. Is there a second? Second by Representative Hoffman. All those in favor of the bill introduction say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, bill is introduced. Any further bill introductions this morning? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and I'm going to open the hearing on House Bill 2811, which is directing the Department of Corrections to establish a correctional center nursery for incarcerated expectant mothers and their children to allow certain expectant mothers to care and bond with their child for up to 36 months while incarcerated. So to give us a bill brief on House Bill 2811, Jill Walters, the First Assistant Revisor for the Office of Revisor of Statutes. Jill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. What House Bill 2811 provides is that, subject to appropriations, the Department of Corrections will establish a women's correctional center nursery on the grounds of the Topeka Correctional Facility not later than January 1st of 2026. The nursery shall house the Correctional Center nursery shall house the nursery program for incarcerated moms where an eligible offender and a child born to such offender while in custody of the secretary may reside together in the nursery for up to 36 months following the birth of the child. And the bill goes on to state the offender's participation in the program won't be affected or interfered with by custodial rights of the child or legal custody, and it won't establish legal custody with DOC. An eligible offender may participate in the program, and then there's criteria that's set out in the bill on who is allowed to participate in it. It's the placement of the offender, so like I would apply to do it, but the placement of me into the program is at the discretion of the nursery team and the secretary, and it can't be ordered by a sentencing court. So it would really be up to DOC and the team that DOC has put together to decide whether an offender qualifies to be in the program. So you to place it in the program, you would have to meet all the requirements, and that the secretary would have to determine that it's an appropriate placement for the offender and the placement is in the best interest of the child, the infant that is there. There's provisions that they have to agree to in writing. They have to agree to, the offender would have to agree to comply with all the policies. If eligible, they have to participate in the state's children's health insurance program, comply with any court decisions. And then if the person is revoked for any reason, that their participation in the program can be revoked also. So that is allowed to do, and then they have to sign a release of information on that. So the secretary can revoke the offender's participation in the program if the offender is not complying with the program, they fail to comply with the signed agreement. If the child becomes seriously ill and the facility can't take care of the child, then you would not be able to participate anymore. And then if they're released from the facility, obviously they wouldn't participate. So if an offender is out, has a small child, and violates their condition of release and makes them, or would require them to come back into incarceration, they wouldn't be eligible to return to the program. So it specifically, the bill would specifically state that. In the bill, there's a created fund in the state treasury called the Nursery Program for Incarcerated Moms Fund, and the fund would be administered by the secretary, and it would be for the purpose of operating and maintaining the program. The bill specifically states that any child support paid to the child who is in the program is deposited in the offender's inmate account and made available to the offender as authorized by the secretary. The program in the department isn't subject to KDHE or DCF licensing, so the DOC secretary and the program would be responsible for doing all things surrounding the program. There wouldn't be any additional licensing. The bill does not apply to an offender who is sentenced to prison for an off-grid offense, is under a death sentence or life without the possibility of parole, or has a current or prior conviction for an inherently dangerous felony, a sex offense if the child was a minor, a crime affecting family relationships and children if the victim was a minor, commercial exploitation of a child, or human trafficking. So if an offender is convicted of any of those things, they would not be authorized to be in the program. And then there's 3 statutes that the bill further amends. One is when determining legal custody of a child and parenting time, a judge has to consider certain factors, and this adds up to the list of factors that the judge considers is regarding custody and parenting time of whether the offender is in the program. And then further, it states that there are things that a judge looks at when a child is a child in need of care, and this would specifically say that a child shall not, this shall not be like the primary reason for a child to be a child in need of care just because they're participating in the program. So that would not be a reason for them to be considered a child in need of care. And then finally, the bill amends another statute prohibiting the placement. Like right now under current law, you can't detain a child in a jail. A child is someone under 18. So we would need to exclude this program from that statute, that if the child was participating in that program, of course, they could be in the facility with their mom. It would go into effect upon publication in the statute book, which is July 1st. And I'd be pleased to stand for questions.
All right. Thank you, Jill, for giving us a thorough analysis of House Bill 2811. Committee, are there any questions for Jill in regards to the bill?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Representative Landwehr?
so Jill, this would be the kids just visiting?
Jill?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. No, ma'am, or excuse me, no, Representative Landwehr. The child would be living with the mother for up to 36 months.
Representative Landwehr?
Okay, so this here sets up a nursery, but then you're probably going to have some type of daycare, some type of recreation area for the children. So does this address any of that beyond that?
Jill?
That would be up to Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, that would be up to the secretary to establish those sort of things.
Representative Landwehr?
All right, and I don't have the bill in front of me. Jill, is there a fiscal on this?
Jill?
I am sorry, I did not bring it up. Yes, there is a fiscal note, ma'am. I just did not bring it up to the podium with me.
Shirley?
That's fine. Thank you.
Representative Landwehr, this is Shirley Morrow. In the fiscal note, it does discuss the building of a facility for the residency, the child care, daycare center, and the addition of employees to help as far as the guards for the correctional facility, and then help with the daycare and the children.
Does it have, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Landwehr?
Does it have an amount?
For fiscal year 2025, 2.7 million, and I believe that's to build a 5,000 square foot facility with individual rooms, a kitchenette to prepare meals, an eating area, common space, and an outdoor playground. In fiscal year 2026, it's 1 million and 19.9 FTE.
Representative
All right,
Landwehr?
thank you very much.
Representative Ballard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe Representative Landwehr asked most of my questions when I saw may reside together. I was wondering where they were going to reside. Is there anything, since I'm trying to read the bill quickly, is there anything in the bill that says there will be supervision in this particular facility over the parents and their child?
Jill.
Because, yeah.
Jill?
So it doesn't I mean, I don't think it specifically says, but of course, the person would be in the facility and subject to the policies. So the Department of Corrections is required to put together policies if this would go through. They have to set up policies, but there's nothing specific in it that says X, Y, and Z will happen if this is going on.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. Does anybody have a number what the maximum capacity would be for this facility?
Jill.
The bill does not state so, sir.
Representative Corbett.
Amazing. Thank you.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jill, in the memo, it says on number 1 is expected to give any eligible offender may participate in the program if such offender is expected to give birth or gives birth to the child after sentencing or while in the custody of the secretary. Does that allow for an off-ramp into the program if this is prior to sentencing? And would it allow a judge to help someone that is interested but hasn't given birth yet? Does the bill speak to that?
Jill.
So I don't think if you give birth before sentencing, I don't think this anticipates that type of situation will be set up.
Representative Howe.
Thank you.
Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Jill, I was trying to read real quickly to see if anybody talked about what's the current practice if somebody gives birth while incarcerated? What happens now?
Jill.
Do you know?
So I'm going to let somebody after me answer that question from DOC. I am sorry, I don't know how long they're allowed to bond. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Representative Estes.
Thank you. Do you know what level of offenders are at the Topeka Correctional Facility?
Jill.
So it is my understanding that all women are housed at Topeka Correctional. So it would be everyone, every severity level that you are in prison for in Kansas.
Thank you.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just digging through a little bit in response to Representative Corbett's question. While it's not in the bill, so the reviser wouldn't have access to it, in the fiscal note, it does talk about the new facility being built, the 5,000 square feet facility that was referenced earlier, would have 10 individual rooms to accommodate a population growth. Even though they only had, in 2023, 4 pregnancies in the Topeka Correctional Facility. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions for Jill in regards to House Bill 2811? Representative Ousley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. That being said, talking about the capacity, how many women's facilities are in Kansas, and would this provide for like a petition process if there was a new mother or an expecting mother incarcerated in another facility to be transferred to this facility?
Jill, but it's just the Topeka Correctional Facility.
There are no other correctional
This is one.
facilities, sir, that house women.
That clears that up then. Thank you.
Any further questions for Jill? All right, seeing none, thank you for giving us a bill brief on House Bill 2811. All right, we'll go ahead and move into proponent testimony. And the first individual that I'll recognize is Senator Kristen O'Shea with the State of Kansas State Senate, District 18. Welcome to committee, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Kristen O'Shea, District 18. I'm going to dive into, I was going to do big picture first, but I'm going to dive in to answer some of these questions. So we wrote that once they were sentenced to KDOC, so for example, we just had a mom give birth to twins while she was in the county. One day later, she was supposed to go to the Topeka Correctional Facility. We wouldn't want someone like that to be not eligible for the program. Those babies would have gone straight to DCF. So that's why we wrote it once they're sentenced, because sometimes that can take 2-3 weeks. They're sentenced to Topeka Correctional Facility, but they're still in their county jail. To Representative Landwehr's questions, I think the intention has always been babies, not necessarily 3-year-olds, right? So you see that 36 months, again, didn't want, I think first intention with the bill, didn't want for a mom who had 2 more months on her sentence to be ineligible for the program. Missouri, which is the bill we modeled this after, I believe that they're 18 or 24 months. So part of what I'm going to hand out here are some already friendly amendments as we worked with KDOC to get rid of that month language so that that's not a barrier. Again, I don't think our intention is to have 3-year-olds there. It's mainly babies. And then also that January 2026 date was a concern. So these are what the stakeholders would consider these friendly amendments. I think my testimony will capture a lot of the other questions. So the Topeka Correctional Facility is the women's only state prison. There are roughly 800 women there. And last year there was 10 women who came in pregnant. So they came in pregnant, had not given birth yet. That number is expected to rise as after COVID, those numbers are rising. The number of women who came in with so they already had a baby, ages 0 to 12 months. They already had the baby. That number was 11. So out of the 10 who gave birth while at Topeka Correctional Facility, one of those babies went to DCF. The others found placement with kin, neighbor, somebody. Out of the 11, okay, so the women who already had a baby, it could have been ages 0 to 12, and then went into the Topeka Correctional Facility. There was 11 of those. Those all went to DCF. I'm trying to work with DCF to find out what number of those then were they able to find kin for versus were determined a child in need of care. So we're talking roughly 20 babies. Those numbers are expected to rise, plus all the caregivers, plus the caregivers that are called on to then watch those children for this duration. I think the average sentencing is 1 to 3 years at the Topeka Correctional Facility, but the experts are in the room to share more about that. So right now, what the process is for any pregnant woman at the Topeka Correctional Facility is that just like anyone else, they go to Stormont Vale or St. Francis here in Topeka, they give birth, they have about 24 hours with that baby bonding, and at that point, baby and mom part ways. And the baby they work really hard to make sure it goes to family, a friend, somebody. Worst case scenario, they go to DCF as a child in need of care. If your heart and mind aren't in a tailspin right now, I don't know why. After the birth, the mom still needs the baby still needs the mom, right? When the baby needs to nurse, mom needs to nurse and vice versa. It's a natural rhythm. You know, right now, I'm the only one feeding this little girl, and I will be the only source of food for the first 5 months, the main source of food for the first year. So there's really, baby might not be in the body anymore, but there's still so much of a connection, which is what we want to see from this program. There's an example. They had a young mother who had a baby. She loved on him for 24 hours. Then he left to go with her parents who boarded a plane to Pennsylvania. So they've got a lot of really great services right now to connect moms with their children. And so even though she got to do mother-infant bonding 3 times a week via Zoom, she wasn't able to touch her baby for another 16 months until she got released. So you can imagine that once she's released, she wants to have this bond with her son, but when baby falls down and gets hurt, are they going to look to mom or to grandma now as that main caregiver? I encourage you to preview Monica's testimony. She's the mom who found herself giving birth while at the Topeka Community Foundation, Topeka Correctional Facility, same acronyms. She found God there and is now doing some really amazing things in her career. All her children are in her life. She found God. It's a very redemptive story. I encourage you to look at that. This bill was modeled after Missouri. They passed this bill just last year. But we're also intrigued by Nebraska, who's been doing this for over 20 years. They'd never required a bill, just some appropriations committee. And so if we were to do this, we would become the 11th state to have a nursery program. You're going to get to hear from some of the volunteers that already wrap around services for these moms and children, and it's really amazing. The team has already been doing field trips to Nebraska to study their model. They've really been diving in to see how we can make this work. So I mentioned the amendments that are in front of you. The last thing that I want to share is the fiscal note. So when we got that back, we were a little frustrated because it's pretty large, a lot larger than what we've seen, for example, in Missouri, et cetera. We know that there's a lot more innovative solutions to getting that cost down, and we're definitely committed to that. There wasn't time with the nature of how session goes and those fiscal notes come out to be able to work on that now, but we're confident that we can make that number a lot less than what it is. With that, I'll stand for questions and I can stay.
All right, thank you, Senator. Committee, are there any questions? Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curious, are there any studies from these states that have been doing this for a number of years about the effects of those children spending those formative years in prison?
Yes.
Senator.
Oh, thank you. There are. Some of the other conferees are going to speak to that. We know it reduces recidivism, and it has good outcomes for the children as well. So some of our other conferees will speak to that.
Representative Mason. And I believe, Representative Mason, you also asked Representative Owens' question. Representative Estes. Yes, well, Representative Williams.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm understanding that the mother stays in the nursery for that 1 to 3 years, approximately. Is that correct?
Senator.
Yes. So as she would be accepted into the program, she would be in one of those 10 rooms that is set up to be more like the nursery. So she would be in that program while also serving her sentence with KDOC.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so then from other states that have programs like this program, do we see any cases where there's any incentivization to be moved over to this area? And what I mean by that is you mentioned that there are on average maybe 20 births from individuals that are in the correctional facility. Have we seen in other states where this is provided and that number rises because perhaps that's incentivizing an opportunity that's better than being on the other side? Any data on that?
Right.
Senator O'Shea.
Right. So I don't know. I don't know that any woman's going to get pregnant so she can go there and be taken care of. But I think many women are incentivized by the fact that, hey, if I get my act together, I get to keep this baby. I get to foster, and then I get to start this new life with this baby, where they're not as incentivized. Baby's going to grandma. Baby's already built an 8-month bond with grandma. Like, I'm not even going to get my child once I get out.
Representative Williams. Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. As you mentioned earlier, you think you can trim this down from 19 to 20 FTEs to make this work a little better than that?
Senator O'Shea.
I sure do. I think we can trim it down quite a bit.
Okay, thanks.
Representative Landwehr, did you have a question? I'm taking that she doesn't. Okay, any further questions for Senator O'Shea? Any further questions for Senator O'Shea? Representative Ballard.
I'm assuming this is a voluntary program.
Senator O'Shea.
So the moms would suggest that they would want to be in something like this. And yeah, KDOC, the nursery team, the secretary would determine if they're a good fit. So again, certain crimes wouldn't be allowed in there, such as sex offender, right? Things like that. But the moms would also get to say, I'm interested in this.
All right, so I'm assuming they would screen out, but I'm trying to think. Let's just say a particular pregnancy occurred and it wasn't, let's just say it was an incest or rape or whatever. They may not want to bond with this child.
Right, and
So
that's
why I asked, is it voluntary?
Yes.
Because then there shouldn't be a stigma attached if this person decides they don't want to be a part of this program.
Absolutely.
Senator O'Shea.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for the senator? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, just real quick, when we're talking about the custody of the child and they could be there a maximum of 36 months, do they have the full ability to say what happens with that child? For example, do they ever go outside of the prison to the zoo or into parks or is that kind of accounted for in the FTE that the correctional facility, those that work there have that ability to take the child out from the facility, or is it 100% the discretion of the parent in the facility?
Senator O'Shea.
Thank you. Good question. So right now, and you're going to hear more about this, there's a walk program that already is helping. So the amount of moms in there that also have children above the age of baby is large. And there's already some really good programs set up to go to Kansas Children's Discovery Center, zoo, things like that. It's always very structured and monitored, and it just doesn't just happen when you want it to, right? Like it's, I can't think of the word, but there's close supervision. That's the word I'm thinking of.
Any further questions for the senator? All right, seeing none, thank you again for being here today and providing your testimony. The next individual that I recognize is, I hope I pronounced this right, Gloria Geither, the Executive Director for the Facility Management of Kansas Department of Corrections. Gloria.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee. My name is Gloria Geither, and I'm the Deputy Secretary of Facilities Management for the Kansas Department of Corrections. I was also the former warden at the Topeka Correctional Facility, and I actually started the Women's Activities and Learning Center in 1990. KDOC fully supports House Bill 2811 to establish a nursery at the Topeka Correctional Facility with Senator O'Shea's noted changes. We are committed to building a new unit specifically for the purpose in order to ensure the best care for mother and child, and we intend to increase our staffing to allow the resident to continue her programs and work inside the facility while still allowing her to bond with her child. We look forward to working with Congresswoman Concanen, Senator O'Shea, the committee and legislature and advocacy groups in order to establish that goal. Thank you for your time. I'll stand for questions.
All right, committee, are there any questions for Ms. Geither? Representative Estes.
What do you think is a realistic FTE requirement for this?
Gloria.
You need to take into consideration transportation, transportation officers for the infants and the moms. You know, child care workers, we need to have child care workers there. I support the FTEs that we have currently that's proposed.
Representative Estes. Representative Helgerson.
If you're endorsing the idea, and if we're going to have a child care center, the department has taken the step of building centers for child care with federal funds. If this ever comes to fruition, we might check out the opportunity we have for using federal funds to build a center for child care separate from the facility, so it would match whatever the federal requirements are, but we may be able to tap into some federal dollars for the child care component.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Gloria? Representative Estes for a second time.
I apologize. I thought of one more question. Have you ever seen studies of what the impact is once that time period is over, that the child is with the parent, with the mom, and then goes on to live with someone else? Is there damage that happens when they're taken away from their mother?
Gloria.
So I've not seen, we haven't had time to do any research on that. I'd be interested in knowing that as well, so we can make sure that we get in the right ballpark on what we're supposed to be doing here. I can tell you, though, back in 1990, this was a long time ago, but back in 1990, what we found was that if a mom and child bond while she's incarcerated, that child is 4 times less likely to become incarcerated or become a statistic as well. So I'm curious to see what that statistic looks like today.
Representative Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you tell me a little bit about is there a proposed plan or footprint for this nursery? And if so, could you tell the committee a little bit about who's restricted to that part of the facility?
Gloria.
So I think, yeah, we've not had a design yet. This came up pretty quick, so we've not had a chance to do a design.
Representative Williams.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So what about the father's right? If the father is involved in this, what happens? I mean, that's kind of a legal question. If let's say it's a mutual agreement, is he allowed to come in to the facility, the nursery facility?
Gloria.
So right now, if the father has the child, is the caregiver of the child and stuff, they're able to come to visitation and see the mom. So I would assume that's not going to be any different.
Any further questions for Gloria? All right, seeing none. Thank you again for being here and providing your testimony.
Thank you so much.
The next individual that I have is Abriana Markham, the Executive Director for the Topeka Doula Project. Abriana.
Good morning, committee. It's Abriana Markham. Thank you.
I apologize.
You're fine. Good morning, and thank you guys for having me. My name is Abriana Markham. I'm the Executive Director and Doula at Topeka Doula Project. At Topeka Doula Project, we offer volunteer doula service for incarcerated mothers. As a doula, I provide education, emotional, and informational support to pregnant people, to pregnant people for pregnancy and postpartum. I also attend labor and delivery. So with that, you can probably imagine the conversations that I can have in the most intimate setting of a person becoming a mother. I also offer a 7-week program so we can discuss all things childbirth, breastfeeding, even what comes up with them as women and them as parents who are incarcerated. I've emailed you all a list of programs that Topeka Correctional Facility has under the Women's Activity Learning Center, or WALK. In this list of programs and classes, you'll see a wide variety of things, but ultimately you'll see chances for the mother and grandmother to cultivate a healthy relationship with their children and grandchildren. I see the prison nursery as an extension of the WALK program. So nothing new, but simply more resources. WALK is able to do a majority of their programs through gracious volunteering and donors. WALK doesn't lack support. What it lacks is funds, and it lacks funds for operations and personnel. That's all it lacks. It doesn't lack any things or any community support in nature. When working with the WALK program coordinator, we developed a small team who are genuinely passionate about these women staying out of prison. We asked ourselves, what do pregnant women need right now? Like, what can we do right now? As people just on the ground who talk to these women every day, what can we do right now? So we thought of the prison nursery, and that's how that came up. And we also realized Missouri just passed their bill last year, and Nebraska's has actually been implemented since 1974 with some newer changes since 1996. And with that, we realized one thing Kansas is always doing is playing catch up. We're always trying to figure out what other people are doing so then we can do it. And so because we're playing catch up, here we are talking to you today. The small team of 3, we toured the Nebraska prison, and they had some wonderful insight in how to go along with this. We saw their setup, we saw their programs, we saw how their programs were managed, what things that WALK already does for the pregnant women in the facility, but also how we can do some of their things, but maybe even better because of the resources that we have here. And so also one thing, not only does Nebraska have a prison nursery, they also have established overnight visitation with moms and their older children, because we also want to remember that these moms typically have other children. This is not typically their first child. So what are we doing to keep the family together? So we asked Nebraska about their overnight stays and what that looks like. Those parents would potentially go into the nursery for that weekend and be moms. And that also sounds a lot like what WALK is already doing with their retreats that they have. So they have a retreat that they go to every weekend. Another volunteer will happily talk to you guys about that in depth. But WALK is already doing this, except we're not doing the overnight stays. So implementing the prison nursery doesn't just help the mom and baby dyad, but it helps the mom and family. And so that's what I want to also talk to you about today. I also remember that the retreats, there is a thing in your email about what the retreats do, how often they occur, and things like that. There is so much that WALK is doing with no funds. Imagine what they could do funded and with a funded nursery. So as I wrap up, I want to advocate for the implementation of a prison nursery. I also strongly recommend the incorporation of a community release supervision for low-risk pregnant and postpartum residents of TCF. Community release supervision offers a more effective alternative in incarceration for individuals who pose a minimal risk to public safety. As the bill is written, the ones who would technically be eligible for this program may also be eligible for a community release supervision, where we can also ensure the same things that they would be doing at TCF. We can ensure that they have health care. We can ensure that they get the right medical needs, support, and education opportunities that they would get at TCF. It would just be our job to help funnel them through that program. Which would also promote healthy pregnancy and a postpartum, and would also promote a healthy pregnancy and positive maternal outcome. Currently, you can read all types of CDC data about what is happening here in Kansas and how the maternal outcome is not so great here for infants and mothers. Yes, other states are already doing this. I actually just saw that last night that Colorado passed a bill for community alternative sentencing for pregnant and postpartum individuals just 7 months ago. So I highly recommend we look into that. I would have more information, but like I said, I just seen it last night. In summary, I urge the committee to consider the implementation of community release supervision for low-risk pregnant and postpartum inmates as a complementary measure. So yes, we want the nursery, absolutely. But let's add something else for those low-risk moms who technically can be out and pose no risk to the population anyways. Why can't we just do the same thing but not incarcerated? Keep these mothers at home with their families. And together, these initiatives can promote true rehabilitation, strengthen Kansas families, and foster a healthier community. Thank you for your attention on this, to this very important issue, and I can stand for further questions at an appropriate time.
All right, thank you. Committee, are there any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you again for being here and your testimony for House Bill 2811. The next individual that I'll recognize is Amy Pinger, the community volunteer for the board of the Kansas Children's Discovery Center. Amy.
Hello. My name is Amy Pinger, and I am a volunteer for Ministry to Incarcerated Families, which is sponsored by the United Women in Faith. And so that is my connection to being here today. Since 2014, I've served as a volunteer for the ministry. Through this effort, the ministry has partnered with the Topeka Correctional Facility for more than 30 years. I have a short tenure at 10 years. But in that 10 years, I've been actively involved with this group, and I can tell you that this has fundamentally changed the women's lives that are at the correctional facility. It's also changed my life. I remember the very first time that I walked in there, and I was terrified. I was going into a prison and, thinking about someone who may be sitting in your chairs who hasn't spent 10 years in prison, seeing what that's like, thinking about putting babies in there and raising babies in there. That may sound scary as well, but let me tell you that this place is unlike any other place. The Women's Activity and Learning Center, because of the United Women in Faith, because of the work of the walk area, we have created a space where families can gather, a space where women can grow. There are rooms that have cartoon characters painted on the wall and toys so that when mom earns the ability to have that visitation, she has the opportunity to be a mom and put into practice some of the skills that we've taught her. We do a parenting class. That is my pride and joy, is spending 6 weeks with these women doing an evidence-based parenting class. A lot of the women that are going through this class are repeating patterns of parenting that they have seen, that they experienced, that led them to the place that they are now. And that's why they don't have the skills that they need to be thriving out in our community. They have the opportunity to go through this class. And by going through this class, which is a deep dive emotionally, which is a hard class to talk about how you would go home and handle this situation with your child when you don't have any contact with your child right now. But they do it. They show up because they're desperate to learn. They're desperate to know a better way and to be better for their children. I think sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom for us to realize that we need the help and that we can all grow and be better and break that cycle of criminal justice. That is one of the things that they talk about most often. I've led approximately 25 sessions of the 6-week parenting classes, educating over 300 women on both sides, the medium and maximum side, and also the minimum side custody facility. Once they complete the class, the 6 weeks class, they are eligible for retreats with their children, where we take them to the lake And we do craft projects. We take them to Kansas Children's Discovery Center. They get to do Easter egg hunts. They get Santa visits. They get photos. I have a mom who I worked with who developed her relationship with her children through our birthday videos, where they get a book and they read the book and they send that home to the kids, and that's how they form their relationship. There's lots of ways that these women can parent their older children through the use of this technology, but those babies, creating that bond with that child as they're born and all the power that can come from that, both for the baby and for the mom. This is an opportunity to look at long-term wins and short-term wins, because for mom, creating that bond sets her up for success. It gives her a reason to stay engaged, to stay out of trouble. The women who I've worked with over the past 10 years who have had their babies and come back without them are not the same because of that sudden, sharp disconnect from that person that they've been growing for 9 months. This is truly something that would change lives, would make positive change in our communities as well, because creating that bond with that child will keep them out of coming back to prison. It reduces the recidivism rate. There are studies, we'd be happy to share those, because there are 9 other active correctional facility nurseries. There are studies that have been done. There is evidence that this works. The cost is a lot, I understand that. I agree that I think that there could be cost reductions. What we do through United Women in Faith, the retreats that we put on, the parenting classes, we fund that. We raise that money, we bring that in. What we need is the facility support. What we need is for there to be more walk coordinators like Ms. Essman, who you'll hear from soon. That is the support that we need through this. This is something that could change the lives of women and children across Kansas, could reduce recidivism, could give people a healthy start, and really break that cycle of criminal justice in our communities. So I humbly ask you to consider the House Bill 2811, and I'll stand for questions.
All right, thank you. Committee, are there any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you again for providing testimony. The last individual that I have written down that's going to be appearing in person is Teresa Tuckshier. I hope I pronounced that correctly. The chairperson for the Ministry to Incarcerated Families with United Women in Faith. Teresa.
Good morning, Chairman and Committee. You were close. It's Teresa Tuckshier, and I am the chairperson for the committee. I work with Amy. United Women in Faith have had the Ministry to Incarcerated Families for involvement in prison for 30 years at least. Our focus has always been to help make the moms better parents and to provide ways to strengthen those bonds with their children. Just a point of reference, 1 in 25 women are incarcerated are pregnant, and approximately 2,000 babies are born to those incarcerated moms. They, as we've mentioned, they give birth 24 to 48 hours later. They are removed and taken to relatives or friends or perhaps foster care. Those folks that take them in may or may not live in Kansas, and they may not live close to the facility in Topeka. We've mentioned the WALK program. The Women's Activities Learning Center was created, as Gloria mentioned, in 1990. One of the things that we are able to offer through that is once the baby is born, they can spend up to 6 hours a day, every day for 6 weeks, bonding with that incarcerated mom. Now, that also depends on whether or not the caregiver is able and willing to bring that child or baby every day. The Zoom meetings are set up, again, if caregivers are willing to do that, but that's not a touch kind of response, but it is learning what mom's voice is like and being able to see her baby. We've mentioned the retreats, and we do have the retreats off-site, but there are multiple retreats that are held inside the facility as well. And this is a day where for 6 hours, they get to spend time being mom or grandma with their baby, their older child, however many children are able to come. And it's a special time down in this walk area that we've mentioned that is a special part of the facility. So if we had the nursery, this would be kind of an extension of what we do down there, and yet a different area to have the bonding going on. The first 36 months are crucial to bonding and crucial to a child's development. There are a lot of things that are necessary that happen between moms and babies, and those have lasting effects on the moms and the children. The parenting skills are taught, as Amy mentioned, and if they could be put into practice right away, they would be much stronger, and there would be bigger bonds, stronger bonds that would be created. It gives moms a reason to stay clean when they get out. If they have not had time with their child, and however many years it might be, and they get out and they try to establish that bond's been established with someone else, and mom gets frustrated, and mom doesn't see that she has a role in that child's life, perhaps. So she may re-offend. We know that the recidivism rates have been reduced. In Washington State, those that participated in a program reoffended at 15%, where non-participants were 38%. And in Nebraska, which we did visit, it's a 16.8 if they participated and 50% returning if they did not. So it obviously is going to save the state money besides the benefits to the parent if these moms don't come back. There is a cost for foster care in Kansas. It's approximately $39,000 a year to have an infant in foster care. We try very hard to place the children with someone that is a family member or a friend, but that in reality doesn't always happen. With the nursery program in Nebraska between 1994 and 2012, they estimated that they saved $6 million in costs to the state. And I would share a quote from Joseph Carlson, who was a professor at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. He says of their nursery program that nursery supplies, staff salaries, and medical expenses would total about 40% less each year than foster care for the babies who would otherwise end up there, and predicted more significant savings from the decline of recidivism. So there are many, many benefits to the program. We're excited and hopeful that this can happen. It's been a dream for United Women in Faith for 30 years. So I would encourage you to support the House Bill 2811, and I thank you for your time, and I would stand for questions.
All right, thank you. Committee, are there any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you again for being here.
you.
As I mentioned, that is the last individual that I have that wants to present in person. You will see that there is a litany of written testimony in regards to support for House Bill 2811. If there's anybody that wishes to provide proponent testimony, this is proponent testimony. And if there's anybody that wishes to address House Bill 2811 in regards to proponent testimony, here's your chance. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to neutral testimony. I don't show anybody that wishes to provide neutral testimony. So we'll move on to the opponent. We have one individual who is in person, and that is Sapphire Garcia-Lice, the Executive Director with the Kansas Birth Justice Society. Sapphire.
Thank you for the opportunity to share my testimony today. The perspective that I bring to you today is as somebody who takes care of thousands of moms and babies a year in Wichita. 1 in 5 of the moms and babies that we take care of, that we provide support services to, have been involved in the criminal justice system, meaning they've served time, they've been on probation or parole, or they've had charges that they've had to face. And from my experience working with these moms, I can tell you that this is a short-sighted, misguided solution. This is a Band-Aid when in fact we have a hemorrhage to deal with. We have major issues in this state. The population of individuals in our prisons is growing. It is growing so much that when our governor took office a few years ago, she had to send a large number of Kansas prisoners to out-of-state prisons. And for the women prisoners, that population is growing quicker than for men. And so this is an issue that we need to deal with urgently before we have a larger crisis on our hands. As I alluded to a moment ago, this is a short-sighted solution. What would be a better solution would be taking this considerable amount of funding and pouring it into a community-based solution whereby moms can stay in the community with their baby and with their older children, as well as with their network of support. I know that several here may be grandparents. I ask you to consider if your child made a mistake and was sent to prison, and you had to face every day of your grandchild being with them in prison, and you weren't allowed to have close daily contact, how devastating would that be to your life? Because that is what this would do. When we deprive folks of their village, the family, whereby they have greater support to raise these children, we do long-term harm. It is damaging. We are also impacting the long-term earning capacity of these women who are in prison. I don't have the exact figure for how much they make when they're working in work programs in the prison, but I know that it's substantially less than they would make at any minimum wage job out in the community. This would take them from their older children. It would take them from their networks of support. It would keep them more dependent on the government for support. It costs $30,000 a year for every person that we imprison in this state. And the nice woman who testified before me also shared that it costs $39,000 for a child who's placed in DCF care. This, again, is a Band-Aid solution. It is not the solution that we need, because we have to think about the older children. What happens to the older children of these moms? I guarantee many of them have older children before they come in to give birth to the one that would qualify for the prison nursery. What about them? What about those kids? What about having mom there for parent-teacher conferences? What about having mom there for birthdays in person? There is not a single government-constructed program that can replicate what families do for one another in the community. And so this is not the solution that we need. I'm not opposed to the idea of a prison nursery, but I think that we can do better than this. Kansas already has a law on the books that allows up to 12 months early release for parenting time. What I would advocate for is that you not support this bill today, and I promise that I will work with the individuals who testified ahead of me on crafting legislation so that we can extend that current law that's on the books to 36 months, so that these moms can stay in the community with their families, with their older children, and have the good support of their community, of their churches, of their mothers, their aunties, their grandmas. They need that. It's not fair that we deprive them of that. And I also shudder to think of these babies who are not going to have very many experiences in their first 3 years outside the walls of this prison nursery. I'm a mother of 4 kids myself, and the miles that we racked up in their first 3 years of life, going on adventures, going to museums, going to visit other relatives, I don't have a way to quantify that, but it was huge, and that has contributed to who they have become as children. Children deserve to have experiences outside the walls of prisons. I thank you for allowing me to provide my testimony today, and I'll stand for questions.
All right, thank you. Committee, any questions? Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here and sharing your perspective. Regardless of the idea of the prison nursery, I'm really hesitant to think that extending early release to 36 months is the answer, because the data already shows that women, especially mothers, are given much more leniency in the court system. They have much more opportunities for probation and to do things. So really, when it comes to the women that are incarcerated, they're there after already being given many, many chances for that very purpose. So if there's another alternative, if there's another way, because I do understand that mother-child bonding, I really, really do. I'm just really hesitant to think that extending that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that perspective. And what I would say to that is it's complex. I care for many of these women who are on probation, who end up violating the terms of their probation and have to go and serve the remainder of their sentence in prison in this facility in Topeka. And what I can tell you is the conditions that we set for probation are very stringent in this state. Myself, as somebody with a good full-time job, my own transportation and childcare, I myself would have trouble abiding by all of the guidelines and requirements for probation. In addition to folks on probation having to pay for substance abuse treatment, mental health care, et cetera. And so instead of sending them back, I understand we're giving them many chances and trying to keep them in the community, but why would we not pivot and offer more resources so that they can get rides to their PO appointments, so that they can keep gainful employment, so that they can make arrangements where they can keep their jobs? Right now, there is such a huge childcare shortage in this state, and not having a job and keeping gainful employment is one of the conditions that folks can violate to be sent back to prison. And so this does not happen in a vacuum. And so I would ask that we pour more resources into those community-based solutions so that people can abide by the stipulations that are set forth when they're on probation.
Representative Owens.
And there are many of those statements I don't disagree with, but again, it is worth noting the specific data because we try to make data-driven decisions, and Kansas has some of the shortest probation terms of any state in the nation already, right? And so while we may have some stringent and some strict expectations, it's such a short-lived process here. There are states that have 10 and 20-year probation terms. We don't do anything like that. And so I think that there really is a much more data-driven approach to this subject. And so I look forward to having those conversations going forward. Thank you.
Representative Sutton. Any further questions for Sapphire? All right, seeing none, thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
I am not showing anybody else that wishes to provide opponent testimony in regards to House Bill 2811. So if there is anybody, now is your chance. Not seeing anybody else, I'm closing the hearing on House Bill 2811. All right, committee, we're going to go ahead and move on to a briefing. I know this was discussed in the House K-12 Education Budget Committee, and actually you probably had received an email last night in regards to some press that was in regards to Zero Eyes. So I will now turn it over to Karen Carroll, the Chief Strategy Officer with Zero Eyes. Karen.
Good morning. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
We can hear you.
All right, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on behalf of the company, I really do appreciate the time this morning. I was fortunate to be in Kansas a few weeks ago and did a briefing. I'd love to replicate that. I know probably several folks on the committee have sat through this before, and I apologize for having to regurgitate some of this in advance. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. I'll walk through a briefing of our capability and where we are in the market. And then I'd love to show you a live demonstration of our platform. So with that, if you give me a second here to get set up to make sure I'm sharing correctly. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that okay.
No, we cannot. Now we can.
Okay. Great. Thank you for bearing with me. So again, members of the committee, my name's Kieran Carroll. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for a computer vision company called Zero Eyes. By way of background, our company is now 6 years old. We are based right outside of Philadelphia. We do have some interesting Kansas ties and roots, and I'll cover that in a subsequent slide. But we started the company after the Parkland shooting happened back in 2018. The original core team came out of the military. Most of us came out of the special operations community. And in 2018, we were all working corporately. When Parkland happened, we all have young kids in schools. Our wives are teachers, our moms are teachers. And as you can imagine, this was absolutely the catalyst for what later became Zero Eyes. And because I like to say that we are, patriots and pragmatists and problem solvers first and foremost, we took a hard look at the circumstances of Parkland, and then we looked at basically every other major active shooter event in a public K through 12 school in the United States going back to Columbine. And the one commonality that we kept finding is that most active shooters tend to stage in an area like a parking lot or a parking garage, a loading dock, a stairwell, the sidewalk approach into a building. They stage in an area and they have a visible firearm, sometimes for a period of multiple minutes, prior to entering the building. And based on our research, the other thing that we found is that the vast majority of these circumstances, there is already an existing security camera in place with field of view coverage of that staging area. So if the folks on the committee happen to remember Parkland was a very typical active shooter event. If you remember the circumstances, the shooter staged in a stairwell for about 45 seconds. He had a visible rifle in the stairwell, and there were at least 2 active security cameras. It turns out that humans don't have the ability to monitor hundreds or even thousands of cameras simultaneously. And what we said is, why don't we build a software that can integrate to existing security cameras that are already in place? And why can't we build a software that will detect a visible firearm? So that's exactly what we did. And to give a sense of scale, right now in the United States, there's close to 80 million existing security cameras. They are all over every piece of public sector. They're obviously all over K through 12 schools. We said, what if we could build a software that can be a massive force multiplier across millions of cameras to detect a visible firearm? So to be really clear, that's exactly what we went and did. Our software detects only a visible gun, so we do not do facial recognition or facial detection or any sort of behavioral characterization. We also don't detect holstered weapons or concealed weapons. Our perspective is that once a firearm is visible in someone's hands, or like a slung rifle, slung shotgun, in a public setting where that is atypical or unusual behavior, someone somewhere should be notified. So we set out to build this company. We started with 6 people. Fast forward, 6 years later, our software right now is in hundreds of schools, hundreds of school districts across the United States and thousands of schools. I'll cover this in a subsequent slide. We've grown the company significantly from the original founding team to over 200 employees. We operate a 24/7 operations center here in Philadelphia. We have another one in Hawaii, which I'll also touch on that subsequently. We have built something that I believe and that we believe is truly a proactive layer of security for a situation like this. I pulled out the Parkland timeline. I already sort of talked through the prep stage there, but I'll touch on the active stage because Parkland was a very typical active shooter event in the sense of what happened after first shots were fired. And if people recall the circumstances, no one really called 911 for almost a minute after the first shots were fired. By the time the Broward County Sheriffs got notified, they had hundreds of 911 reports that came in, and the information was largely inaccurate and conflicting. So it said that there were multiple gunmen inside the building. It said that the shooter was armed with a machine gun, which, as some of you know, means something totally different to law enforcement than it does your average civilian. They also misidentified where the shooter was in the building. By the time the Broward County Sheriffs showed up 15 minutes into the event, they had conflicting reports of potentially multiple gunmen armed with automatic weapons barricaded on the 3rd floor, when in fact the shooter was only in the building for 6 total minutes. He was long gone by the time the cavalry showed up. Unfortunately, in the interim, we think that many kids bled out and probably could have been saved if they had a little bit more proactive and a little bit better situational awareness. So that is exactly what our platform is designed to do. I will show this to you here in several subsequent slides. But from a really high-level use case, this is how our software is designed to work. Like I said, our software integrates to existing security cameras that are already in place and is designed to only detect a visible firearm. So again, to be clear, nothing holstered, nothing concealed. A gun has to be typically brandished in your hand or, like I said before, a slung rifle or a slung shotgun. Our software is designed to work within milliseconds. And then on top of that, unique to our company, we are the only provider of this capability that is a 24/7 managed service. Like I mentioned before, we have two 24/7 operation centers. A human is going to verify within a few seconds every alert that hits our platform to determine if we think it's a threat or not. We hire former military veterans in these analyst roles and some law enforcement veterans. They are the best in the world at being comfortable making a split-second decision whether something's a potential threat or not. And I'll show this to you how this works in the demo. And then on top of that, because we're software, we have the ability to integrate to any existing security camera. We have the ability to integrate to any existing emergency 911 path. So we have the ability to send these alerts out directly to the folks on site within a school setting that's typically going to be the superintendent, their staff, anybody involved from a safety or security perspective within the district. We have the ability to integrate directly to local 911. So a 911 call operator will get the alert populated directly onto their screen. In Kansas, we use a provider called Rapid SOS that owns data pathways directly to local 911 dispatch centers. We also have the ability to integrate to any higher level infrastructure. So schools in Kansas have done a good job implementing things like access controls and mass notification, video management systems, public safety information management tools. We have the ability to integrate to all those things over very simple software API pathways. I'm going to change topics here for a second and talk through a few different use cases that I think are interesting, and then I'm going to show you some real-world zero-eyes detections in the last year or so that have directly led to arrests. But what you're seeing right here, this is the Michigan State shooting. If you remember, if you recall the circumstances, this was about 18 months ago now. I like showing this example for a few different reasons. One is we're doing a ton of work in Michigan. So when I started getting tweets that there was an active shooter at Michigan State University, I immediately hopped on the police scanner. And for the first 30 minutes, I geolocated every single place a shots fired 911 phone call came from. So that's what you're seeing there on the map image on the left. Those white circles with the blue pin drop are shots fired 911 phone calls in the first 30 minutes. That's about a 5.5 square mile radius. The shooter was only ever between the two buildings where the red circle is. If you recall the circumstances, he walked into a union hall and shot 3 students in the union hall, walked into another building, and then proceeded to leave campus. I believe he was only on campus for about 10 total minutes. The top right image there, this is what Michigan State University police tweeted out about 2 hours into the event. Again, really typical active shooter behavior. This is the shooter as he is staging in the initial stairwell of the first building. You can see him pulling a pistol out of his pocket and loading a magazine. From there, he walked into the main part of the union hall and shot 3 students. It took Michigan State University over 2 hours to get this out to the media. So they had to go into the tapes, they had to find the admin passwords, they had to log in, they had to go frame by frame and find this. In the ensuing 2 hours between them releasing this this image, you can imagine that social media was awash of spurious reporting, rumors. Obviously, there was reporting of it's a white guy with an assault rifle, and police went around and played whack-a-mole across this huge area trying to figure out where exactly this guy was. If you look there at the bottom right, so we have access into the raw video file. We ran through our software. We get a zero-eyes detection as he pulls the gun out of his pocket. This is what could have been dispatched out to responding officers within 3 to 5 seconds. They would have known exactly who to look for, what he was armed with, and where he was on campus. It's interesting to note, too, that this image is ultimately what got this guy caught. Someone saw this guy walking down their street about 3 hours into the event. They called it in. Law enforcement went to confront him and he ended up taking his own life. At this point, he was several miles north of that red circle, so he was actually off the map. I think this does a great example illustrating sort of the power of what we're able to bring for these unique situations. And now I'll change subjects a little bit. And I'll show real-world zero-eyes detections that have led to arrests over the last year or so. And just a caveat, I'll say this. Zero-eyes is deployed across tens of thousands of cameras right now in the United States. Like I mentioned before, we're all over school districts in some states. We also do a lot of municipal work. Cities like putting us into their cameras, really to combat gun violence, gangs, and all that kind of stuff. We're in transit locations. We're in bad areas across the United States. We see bad actors with firearms all the time. And this is a really good example. If you see there at that image on the bottom left, this is a zero-eyes detection of somebody who was intoxicated with a pistol, a Glock there on his chest. This person ended up having multiple warrants. We got the corresponding law enforcement arrival and arrest with that officer with her drawn weapon there. We see this kind of behavior very frequently. I'll show another example. Again, coming from transit, where we see bad actors wait to rob people as they come through these turnstiles. They'll typically have a visible firearm. I like showing this one in particular because this guy was a particularly bad actor with multiple violent felony warrants who actually tried to run from police. So we were able to help get him off the street. And then, of course, as you can imagine, just in larger city settings, we see juvenile males with guns all the time. This individual has some sort of a machine pistol here. And then, as I was trying to cherry pick examples to show the committee, this is I was just, going for different municipal and city use cases before I go into schools. But this is a good example of weapon detection that came, and this guy ultimately ended up trying to sell a weapon illegally, ended up getting arrested from last year. And then a slightly different scenario from a few months back where there were individuals shooting off shotguns in a municipal parking lot, which is illegal, and also with very little regard to the direction that the rounds ultimately fell. And now we'll transition into schools, which is the bread and butter of the company. That's why we started the company, was to do something proactive about school shootings. I'll say this: we see firearms in schools literally every single day. We see a wide variety. A large amount of what we see with students is social media generated. So, for example, TikTok has challenges for kids to bring guns into school. This is a good example from a New Mexico middle school from last year. This is a TikTok challenge. Our software detected this firearm within milliseconds. Our team verified it within another couple seconds. It got dispatched out to local PD. They came and found the student within about 5 minutes. This was later at night. This was 8 o'clock at night local time, so there were no administrators on site. So it went directly to law enforcement. As you can imagine, we see a large amount of firearm activity after hours or on weekends, really when administrators just aren't there. Another example, I was trying to again, cherry pick some examples. People always ask me about rural schools. There's always concerns with bandwidth and infrastructure. This is a good example from last year of a pistol detection at a rural school in upstate Pennsylvania, where Pennsylvania State Police had to come from about 15 minutes away to actually detain this student. These were on very low resolution cameras, but we're still able to get detections on cameras like this. And then I'll talk probably about the most important thing that we do as a company, which is de-escalation. As you can imagine, I mentioned this before, we hire and train the industry's leading analysts to make these split-second decisions, whether something is a potential lethal threat or not. And this is a really good case. We see students bring non-lethal types of firearms or gun-like objects into schools all the time. And typically, they're going to be airsoft guns, BB guns, Orbeats guns, which is a very popular social media challenge. If you don't know Orbeats, they're a manufacturer of a gun that shoots a little gel-filled pellet. Kids will cut the orange tip off of these guns. They'll paint over it, which is what this individual did. The form factor of these guns looks very similar to that of a real gun in certain circumstances. And this is why we hire highly trained analysts to make a split-second decision. So in this case, our analyst got this detection and said, you know what, that's an Orbeats gun. Instead of escalating this to a full-blown law enforcement style alert, he just picked up the phone, he called the school and said, hey, you have one of these in the back hallway. We do this dozens of times a day at this point across our deployed customer set. Now, if something is ever a gray area, we will handle it as a potential real threat until we know otherwise. And this is a good example from last year in Texas, where we've got a series of detections of a student carrying what looked like a rifle across the courtyard around midday. This went directly to the on-site school resource officer over our mobile app. He responded within a minute, knew exactly who the kid was, found him. This ended up being a BB gun. I do want to point out that this is illegal to have on campus, but that being said, we do see kids bring these into campuses very frequently. And then the last piece of this, this is just one example out of literally thousands that we've seen over the last couple years. People always ask us, they say, why do you have to have a human do that initial verification? Why can't the artificial intelligence and computer vision that we utilize just be smart enough to sort of know what's a gun and what's not. And unfortunately, within the media, there's been quite a lot of misconception about how powerful and accurate artificial intelligence really is. I can tell you this, we see kids mimic objects as guns all the time in schools. Typically it's a cell phone or another smaller handheld object. A human could tell you within a second that this kid has a cell phone and it's not an actual gun, despite his pose and his carry position. We are not confident an artificial intelligence algorithm will ever be able to do that with high confidence at scale. And that's why we employ a human-in-the-loop methodology to actually verify these alerts in real time and get them out to districts as quickly as possible. The last set of imagery I'll show you, it's sort of been a trend with the company that over the last few years, every time there's an active shooter event within school districts, we typically get a phone call a couple weeks later, and they say, hey, can you come down and deploy our cameras? And obviously school districts that have just suffered an incredibly traumatic event are very worried about peace of mind for their students, but they're also worried about copycats coming back, which historically we've seen that happen since Columbine. This is Oxford County, Michigan. This is Oakland County, Michigan. This is Oxford High School. If you remember back in November of 2021, they had a mass shooter event where 4 students were killed and I believe 7 more were wounded. This has been back in the media a lot lately because the shooter's parents just got indicted and sentenced. They had given him a gun for his birthday. The student had a bunch of mental health and behavioral health issues. The parents were actually with him that morning at the school, and the school said, can you take him home for the day? And the parents said no. So they sent him back to class, and he had a pistol in his backpack in his locker. And he walked into his locker, took the gun out, walked into a bathroom, shot 2 kids in the bathroom, and then proceeded to walk around the hallways of Oxford High School for about another 10 minutes in front of at least 35 existing security cameras with an openly brandished pistol. He proceeded to shoot 9 more people. Oxford High School's biggest problem is that they didn't know who the shooter was, where he was, and what he was armed with for 10 minutes. The kid had an openly brandished pistol the entire time. When law enforcement, and they responded very quickly and efficiently, but when they first entered the building, they saw him and thought that he was a victim. So they weren't even sure who they were looking for. I like showing this because these are the same cameras that were there that day. They did not change their cameras out. These are the same cameras that were on, active, and recording. They're in the middle. That's our ZeroEyes mobile app. We give this to anybody in the district who needs it. This is how administrators at Oxford would have been notified as that kid came out of the bathroom and proceeded to walk around hallways with an openly brandished pistol. A little bit more on the technology from a high level, and I'm very happy to go into as much detail as necessary on this, but I just want to be really clear on how the software works. So if you start there at the left of the screen, at the camera level, our software detects, like I said before, detects a visible firearm. It is not designed to do anything else. We don't do anything behavioral or facial. We fully understand the privacy and ethical and legal constraints of that type of capability. We've decided to be the best in the world at just doing firearm recognition from existing cameras. As a result, we don't have the privacy concerns that some of these other software AI companies do. The output of our software is what we call a keyframe image detection with a timestamp and a geolocation. I will show this to you live in a demo here shortly. And then on top of that, like I mentioned before, we are a 24/7 managed service. That means all the cameras that are on our platform and all the customers that are on our platform are fully managed by our team to make sure that we are only ever sending out threats that we believe are real. And then on top of that, we have the ability to integrate to the existing infrastructure that's already in place. I already talked through this, but direct to 911, direct to the school district, direct through any integration pathway that the end customer needs. This happens simultaneously. The entire process is designed to take from detection to end user notification between 3 and 5 seconds. So it's very quick, very efficient. Our analysts, one analyst right now can manage about 10,000 cameras at once to give you a sense of scale. This will make sense when you see the demo, but we don't have the ability to look into live camera feeds. This is important for 2 reasons. One is it's a privacy issue for us. We do not want access into any customer's live feed, but it's also a bandwidth issue for most of our school districts. We don't want to be pushing streamed video over the cloud and really tie down network. We just do really quick, simple, and efficient image recognition and verification. We follow air traffic control methodology of crisis management. So when one of our analysts gets a real world event, they own that event and all the communication until it is fully resolved. and the rest of the team will obviously pick up around them, sort of a round-robin style system of alerting. Very quickly, I'll touch on the policymaker piece of this. I mentioned this before, but our software right now is live within education, I think in about 33 states. We're in thousands of schools across the United States. About a year and a half ago, what we realized is that we're a highly differentiated technology. There's no one else in the market doing it like this. We have really set ourselves apart. The reason being is everything you see there on the right of the screen. We are a very big believer in standards as a company, common sense standards that policymakers will understand and be able to back. One of the reasons we've been successful doing this is we own all the intellectual property around this capability. So we're the patent holder. We have multiple patents on this. We've raised quite a bit of money to really build out and scale and grow the business. Probably the most important thing, though, is we have major U.S. government validation. We are Department of Homeland Security Safety Act designated company. They've determined that we're something called a qualified anti-terrorism technology. This is a really big deal. This means that DHS has vetted all of our processes, methodologies, how we build the software, deploy the software, manage the software, and said that basically we do what we do what we say we can do. This is an ongoing certification as well. We have to basically requalify every couple years, provide DHS more data, more customer data. They check with customers to make sure that we are performing as advertised. On top of that, we have all the typical industry data management, information management certifications like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. We're the only company that does this as a managed service in the industry. We are not trying to oversell and put the burden of doing the verification piece on school districts. They are already task saturated and resource constrained. Our thought and feeling and perspective is that the builder of the software should own the management of the software. And that's exactly what we have done and brought to market. On top of that, everything we do is built here in the U.S. by U.S. citizens. We do not offshore any piece of our development. We do not do any third-party collection of data. A lot of companies in the industry will go to Google and download images, or they'll buy movies, and they don't own their data. And if anyone's following sort of the drama right now, when it comes to like ChatGPT and OpenAI and the New York Times suing these guys for using New York Times proprietary copyrighted data, we are absolutely going to see the ramifications of that in the security industry of companies that are using other people's data to build, commoditize, and monetize a product. So our feeling from day one is that we want to own all of our own data to avoid any sort of legal or business risk to our end users. And the last piece of this, like I mentioned before, we have about a little bit more than 200 employees in the company. 80% of the company is a military veteran. We hire veterans into emerging technology roles. And the reason should be fairly obvious. Veterans are very, very mission driven. This is a mission critical capability for our end users. And we hire people that actually care and want to be a part of the solution. On the left side of the slide here, more on the policy impacts. What we realized is that we're a very bipartisan, nonpartisan technology solution. We thread the needle between overly infringing on Second Amendment or overly infringing onto civil rights or any sort of privacy. That has been done by design since day one. My role is obviously to limit a policymaker's perception of risk of backing one company in the space, but we're the only company that's actually built this way to do this service. And just a little bit more sort of about where we are in the industry. I kind of glossed over this initially, but we're in quite a few school districts here in the United States. Like I said, we're operating across I think 33 states at this point, or even more. Also with higher ed, colleges, universities, and trade schools. We also operate within Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies, particularly healthcare, big box retail, third-party logistics. I threw some of the folks that are customers up there so people can just get a sense. And then on top of that, we're also a fully fledged federal contractor. So the same software that we build and deploy into schools is also on military bases. It's also with federal agencies like the VA. It's within major mass transit here in the United States. Our goal is to universalize this across multiple different customer sets, all using the same basic product. And then I promised a little bit of an anecdote about Kansas, and if you guys can indulge me for a second. We actually have a very interesting Kansas tie. Going back to the 2020 and the COVID era, our head of R&D is a native Jayhawk, and during COVID, he moved his family back to Kansas, and we set up an R&D green screen lab in a barn right outside of Lawrence, and we built software directly for the Department of Defense. And the lessons that we learned while doing this has heavily informed our product roadmap and product development. And at the time, we contracted out with students from KU and other folks in Kansas to really help us build these data sets. We took the lessons learned here and brought them back to Philadelphia. So now we have an almost 5,000 square foot Hollywood-style green screen lab where we can build custom and unique data sets for our customers and basically replicate any environment in a green screen lab. But this was sort of the infancy of and how we evolved. It all started in that barn right outside of Lawrence. And I can go ahead and pause there for questions. I know I've talked a lot, and I do apologize for that. But I'm happy to show a live demo if the committee has time. I do realize you guys are time constrained, but would be really happy to show a live demo if that's the direction we wish to go.
Actually, we do have another group that's scheduled to be having this room at 10:30, so we'll just go ahead and open up for questions and then adjourn. Representative Estes.
Thank you. We have the World Cup coming to Kansas, so I'm very curious as to whether or not you have successfully been able to apply this to large group gatherings.
Kieran.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. We're in numerous cities. We're in malls that have more than 10,000 people in and out the door every single day. Again, the software is limited by what it can actually see within field of view. The one thing that I've noticed, and human behavior tends to purport this, is that when someone has a gun, people make as much room between that person and the gun as possible. We unfortunately just saw this happen and play out in Kansas City. So we are our software is deployed into cities for that exact use case.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what is the level of compatibility of the states that you're in related to school districts and their camera and their systems? Is the compatibility really easily applied with your software or integrated with your software?
Kieran.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, ma'am. That's a fantastic question. We integrate to digital IP cameras. We need very minimal specs, 720p resolution or better. A rule of thumb is that if a camera is less than 10 years old and digital, largely we will be able to operate successfully on that camera. And we also do assessments, network assessments. We send a full team out for customers just to make sure that prior to us going live and installing that they are a fit for what we're trying to do.
And real quick, Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When this was presented, I happened to be on K-12 when this was presented in there, and one of the questions I had was at the Chiefs Parade, there were many instances where people had reported that they saw these individuals with their guns out several minutes before the shooting happened, and I asked if this technology would have worked and alerted the police before the shots were fired, and I believe the answer was yes. Is that correct?
Kieran.
It's difficult to armchair quarterback without seeing the individual video, but my sense is yes. If the guns were visible and under field of view of a camera that we're deployed on, the answer is most likely yes.
All right, committee, as I mentioned before, this is included in the K-12 education budget. I think the chairperson is nodding her head in agreement. So this would be something that we'll probably be discussing when we have that budget hit the floor. So committee, until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, we are adjourned.